So you opened up YouTube and you clicked on this video because you wanted to improve your English pronunciation of ED verbs. As you may have heard in that sentence, there's a lot more to ED verbs than meets the eye. That is what we're going to talk about in today's video, and I'm going to give you some really easy, helpful strategies so that you know how to say these verb endings with confidence and ease. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why we don't say, I opened up YouTube and learned how to say ED verb endings. For additional fun, we will be applying these ED verb endings to common English expressions and phrasal verbs. So stick through because you'll be learning tons of pronunciation tips as well as important essential vocabulary that we use on an everyday basis. Stay through to the end because you don't want to miss it. Hi there, I'm Luke, your friendly linguistics and language enthusiast, and this is Go Natural English. If you find this, as well as the other great Go Natural English content useful to you in improving your English, definitely consider pre-registering for our complete Go Natural English course at the link up here. I think 2020 was a difficult year for everyone. And now that we're at the beginning of 2021, it's the time for hope and new beginnings. And what better way to celebrate this new beginning with the new year than by meeting our goals of improving our language abilities? This is the time to really set goals for ourselves and not only meet, but exceed those goals. And by doing the Go Natural English complete course, that's the perfect way that you can go about it. When you register, you will have access to a complete comprehensive course along with live coaching sessions with our awesome teacher, Dawn. The individualized attention that you get with our live coaching sessions in the areas of speaking, listening, and conversation practice cannot be beat. So definitely consider pre-registering because registration doesn't go on forever. It is a limited time event and there are limited spots. So if this is something that you're interested in, then by all means go for it now because there's no time like the present. Now back to our ED verb endings. You may have noticed at the beginning of the video that I said opened with a D, I said clicked with a T, and I said wanted with an ud. Why is it that we say these different endings for these different words? Let's break it down for you today in this video. The main things we have to consider when thinking about how we pronounce ED verb endings are the sound that comes before the ED verb ending, as well as the sound that comes after the ED verb ending. You have to remember that when we speak English, even though we have words, when we speak, we tend to connect them all together. We don't say words individually like, hello, my name is Luke. We connect it and link it by saying, hello, my name is Luke. So as a result, the ED verb endings, like many other things in English, are affected by what sounds surround it. Let's go through some of the things that impact these ED verb endings. And by the end, you will know exactly why we say things like clicked with a T, wanted with an ud, and opened with a d. Let's first consider the sounds that come before the ED verb ending. We have what are called voiced and voiceless sounds that can impact the ED verb ending. If before an ED word ending, we have a voiced sound, which means that the vocal cords are vibrating, we in turn make a voiced ED sound, d. On the other hand, if we have a voiceless sound before the ED word ending, then we use a voiceless t sound. And by voiceless, I mean that the vocal cords are not vibrating. Let's do a fun little experiment so you can see what I'm talking about here. Place your fingers on your neck and make a f sound like F. When you go f, you'll notice that there's no vibration here. That's because f is a voiceless sound, meaning that the vocal cords are open. Compare this with v. V is a voiced sound, like in V. This means that your vocal cords are vibrating. These are just two examples of voiced and voiceless sounds that at the end of a verb would impact whether the ed verb ending is a t or a d. Let's go through some more examples of voiced and voiceless sounds and how they impact ed verb endings. Voiced sounds, or in other words, all sounds that impact the ed verb ending to make a d sound, include all vowels, such as a, e, u, etc., diphthongs like I, a, o, and so on, and R-colored vowels, so things like air, or, and so on. In addition to these three, we have voiced consonants, which are consonants which are made with vocal cord vibration. These include b, g, z, v, j, j, m, n, ng, l, and the. So anytime you have an ed verb ending with these voiced sounds before them, the ed is pronounced as d. Voiceless sounds, on the other hand, which are ones that are made without any vocal cord vibration and make ed verb endings a t rather than a d, can include sounds like p, k, f, s, th, and sh, ch. Last but not least, we have two sounds that are not included in this list, and that's because they do something different. They are the sounds t and d. In these cases, we don't do a simple t or d verb ending for ed verbs, but instead we insert a little to separate them. So when you have a word like invented, we insert an in between the t and the d. Invented, ud. Same with created and faded, ud. These are the only true ones that you actually pronounce the E that's written at the ends of these words. Now that's the general overview, but let's get into some specifics. Like I said before, it's not just the sound that comes before the ED that can impact it, but also in some cases the sound that comes after the ED verb ending. In today's video, we're going to focus on the voiced sound group, such as the vowels, diphthongs, R-colored vowels, and the voiced consonants. And then in the next video, I'm going to talk about the voiceless sounds, as well as the sounds that end in t or d, and how those are impacted also by the sounds that come after the ed ending. So stay tuned for that. Let's dive in today with the voiced sounds, and I'll try and use some interesting expressions so that you are improving not just your pronunciation, but your vocabulary as we go along. You ready? Let's do it. First up, let's talk about the ed verb endings after vowels, diphthongs, and R-colored vowels. And the first examples we'll talk about are when those words are at the end of a word. In these cases, you pronounce what's called a light release D. So you'll notice that when we say these words like showed and appeared, we don't do a hard D. We don't say showed, appeared, which are true hard release Ds. But instead, it's a very light touching of the tongue to the roof of the mouth. So we don't say showed, appeared, but showed, appeared. It's like it's just barely touching the top of the tongue. But you still get that voiced quality that I talked about, the d. Let's go through some sentence examples. The snow has thawed. The snow has thawed. You'll notice that it's not a hard D, but a soft D. If you're not familiar with this word, thawed, it means that at the end of winter, beginning of spring, when the snow starts to melt because the weather's warming up a bit. Let's do another one. I went to the complete Go Natural English Fluency course link in the description box and pre-registered. You'll hear that it's just a light release d. You'll also notice that we tend to do this light release d when we have it before certain consonants. This group of consonants are called semi-vowels because in some ways they're like consonants, but in other ways they're kind of like vowels in that there's no real contact with the tongue or lips. They're more openly produced sounds, making them a bit like vowels, but in function and practice, acting like consonants. So that's why we call them semi-vowels. They're like half vowel, half consonant. These three sounds include y, w, and r. Let's hear them in functional sentences. They argued with each other. Argued with. Argued with. Light, easy, released, d, but it's still there. Same thing with the next sentence. She was annoyed yesterday. Annoyed yesterday. Annoyed. That's that light released d. Annoyed yesterday. Now, let's see something interesting that happens when you have a word like you or your after these words. What often happens is that we change the d and y to a j sound instead. Let's go through some examples of this. He wasn't honest with you and he played you. Played you. Played you. You'll hear here that it's a j sound. We can actually also say this sentence as a d light release, like in the previous examples. He played you. Played you. Played you. But it's also common where we do that j sound, played you. So it's important to be aware of what this is and why we use it. If you're not familiar with this expression, when we say that you played someone, it means that you tricked or deceived them. Another example of this is he called you out, called you out. You could say he called you out, which goes along with just doing a light release duh, but sometimes we'll also do called you out. He called you out. If you're not familiar with this expression, to call someone out means to point out and identify something that they did wrong, to confront them about it. Next up, we have the ed verb ending before a consonant. This can often be pronounced with a light release d, but even more often, we tend to delete the sound, especially in common expressions, common words, and things that we say on a regular basis. So let's go through some examples of what this deletion sounds like. They showed their true colors. They showed their true colors. They showed their true colors. When I say this quickly, you might notice that there's not really a d sound at the end of showed, and it almost sounds like you're saying it in the present tense form of they show their true colors. This is true. Oftentimes, English speakers, because there's more effort and having to slow down to put in a true d sound in there, we often just delete it, and we rely on context where you'll know what we're actually saying. So oftentimes, you'll have to use context to know if someone is saying in the present tense, they show their true colors versus they showed their true colors in the past. They showed their true colors. By the way, to show your true colors means to reveal your true character, whether it's through some of your actions or just things that you say. It means to show your true colors. Here's another one. It was a difficult year, but we weathered the storm. Weathered the storm. Weathered the storm. There's no real D in this one either. We could say weathered the storm, but that would only be if we really wanted to emphasize something, because you have to really slow down the rate of speech in order to say weathered the storm, weathered the storm. So it's more common to just say weather the storm. Both the same in present or past. To weather the storm means to successfully deal with or manage a problem. Next, we have this d sound before vowels and diphthongs. Typically, when you have a d sound between vowels, it results in what's called a tap or a flap. We hear this in words like water, 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 da da da, der, 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 water, water. Same thing with butter, 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 der, 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 der. That is a tap or a flap sound, that da-da-da. It's almost like a fast D sound. This is the same when we have the D at the ends of ed verbs and when they're between two vowels. So let's go through some examples of that. I ponied up the $20 that I owed Adam. There are actually two of them in here. Ponied up, ponied up, ponied up, and owed Adam, owed Adam, owed Adam. Lots of flaps in this sentence. So try that. Ponied up, ponied up, ponied up, owed Adam, owed Adam, owed Adam. If you do a real true D, it sounds a little too slow. Owed Adam, owed Adam, owed Adam. It sounds a little too stressed and emphasized. So we like to make things fast when we speak English, so we do that fast da-da-da flap tap sound. If you're wondering what it means to pony up money, it means to contribute money to something. So especially money that you owe to someone else. Here's another example. He paid an arm and a leg for that. He paid an, paid an, paid an. Because this is between two vowels, it's a flap. Paid an, dun 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 dun. So a fast D sound. To pay an arm and a leg for something means that you pay a lot of money for something. And our final point here is with H. H can be interesting because it can be deleted in some cases, especially if it's not emphasized or it's in an unstressed word in a sentence, or it can be fully pronounced. And which one you do will impact how you pronounce the ed verb ending. Let's discuss each one. So when you are emphasizing a word that starts with H, we often do pronounce the H, and as a result, the ed verb ending is pronounced like a light release D, like in plenty of other words that we've just described. On the other hand, if you have it not emphasized and the H is deleted, it makes it so that the D is often between two vowels, and as a result, the D doesn't become light release, but is pronounced instead like a tap or a flap sound. Let's go through some examples and you'll, I think, see the difference that I'm talking about. You showed her, you showed her. Do you hear how the H is very clearly pronounced? Because her is emphasized in this sentence. You showed her. You're emphasizing the word her. As a result of that H being pronounced, it acts like a consonant, and you have the D sound, a light release D, but you have the D sound fully pronounced. Just so you know, when you say that you showed her, that means that you proved something to her. And it can actually often be used sarcastically, like, oh yeah, you showed her. Like, you didn't actually prove anything, but that you're using that sarcastically to say, oh yeah, you proved something by doing that, when really you didn't. Let's compare this with you showed him the book. You showed him the book. Do you hear how I'm not really pronouncing the H in that? Because him in this sentence is not stressed or emphasized. So you showed him the book. It's almost like the H doesn't even exist. And instead of him, it's more im. Because of this, the ed verb ending in showed is actually more of a flap than a true light release D sound. You showed him, you showed him, showed him, showed him, showed him. More of a flap tap sound. Now, let's look at ed after voiced consonants. For the most part, these don't stray too far from what we've just described, but there are some interesting cases that we should definitely highlight right here. So let's go through some examples. At the ends of words, we still do a light release D sound. So for example, in the sentence, a penny saved is a penny earned, earned, earned. You hear that light release D sound, earned, earned. So this expression means that it's a good idea, it's wise to save money. We also use a light release D here when they're before semivowels like r, w, y, as well as H when it's fully pronounced. So let's highlight some examples here. He sunbathed right before lunch. Sunbathed right before lunch. Bathed, bathed, bathed right before lunch. You hear that the, then a light release D, and then the R sound r. Because of this environment, we fully pronounce the light release D sound, and we don't delete it. By the way, to sunbathe means to suntan, for those of you who weren't familiar with that word. Now let's look at it in front of H. They didn't buzz her in, they buzzed him in, buzzed him in, buzzed him in. Do you hear how we keep that full light release D in front of him because we're fully pronouncing the H, just like in some of the previous examples? Keep this in mind later because the same rule applies where we drop it. Keep this in mind later because you'll hear that when we drop the H, it behaves a little bit differently. For those of you unfamiliar with the idea of buzzing someone in, it means to let someone into a locked door by hitting a buzzer, such as in an office or an apartment building. Now we have before you and your. This behaves much in the same way where it can become a light D, but it can also be a J sound. Listen to this example. You pulled yourself together, or you pulled yourself together. You pulled yourself as a J sound, or a light release D, pulled yourself, pulled yourself. To pull yourself together means to regain control of your emotions. Before vowels, the D can attach to the following vowel. So it sounds like a D, but it might sound like it's part of the next word. This can actually be useful for those students of mine who have difficulty with these consonant clusters. This can actually be useful for my students who have a hard time with consonant clusters, such as when you have a Z and a D right next to each other, like buzzed, buzzed, buzzed. When you say buzzed in, the D attaches to the in next part, the vowel of the next word. Let's look at some examples of this. After a full day of work, he was exhausted and called it a day. Called it, called it, called it. It's almost like the D isn't part of called anymore, but it becomes part of it. So it's dit. Called it. Called it a day. Another one. They dragged his name through the mud. They dragged his name through the mud. There's a couple things going on here. The H in his isn't emphasized, so it's often dropped. And as a result, the D in dragged kind of attaches to the next word, this new word is, rather than his. So dragged is, dragged is. They dragged his name through the mud. Dragged his name through the mud. Interesting stuff, don't you think? Just in case you were wondering about the meaning of the last two sentences, to call it a day means to stop working for the rest of the day, and to drag someone's name through the mud means to almost destroy their reputation by saying lots of bad things about them. Last but not least, we have D before consonants. In this case, they can be fully pronounced as a light release D, but in many cases are often just deleted entirely. So let's go through some examples so you can hear how these sound. I have subscribed to the Go Natural English YouTube channel. I have subscribed to, subscribed to, subscribed to. Doesn't sound different than the present tense form subscribe to, like I will subscribe to the Go Natural English YouTube channel. That's because of this consonant cluster with the D in front of a T sound. We often just delete the D, so it sounds exactly the same. Same thing with the next sentence. He paved the way for the rest of us. He paved the way for the rest of us. You'll notice that you don't really hear a D sound like you would expect with paved, paved. Instead, we say pave the. He paved the way for the rest of us. When we say pave the way for the rest of us, we mean that they did some very important contribution so that we now have benefited from the things that this person has done before us. They paved the way for the rest of us. All right, everyone, I know that was a lot of information. So let's review and put everything together in an easy to understand way. Say these sentences along with me because the best way to learn is to practice saying them yourself. You ready? Let's go. First, light release D. This is pronounced at the ends of words before certain consonants like y, w, r, and it's often pronounced in front of an emphasized H sound. Say these sentences with me. Everybody agreed. Everybody agreed. Are you all pre-registered yet? Are you all pre-registered yet? You called him and not her. You called him and not her. Next up, when we use j, we use it in front of you and your. We don't have to use it. We can continue to use a light release D, but we do sometimes use j instead. We all followed you. We all followed you. They grabbed you a drink. They grabbed you a drink. Now we have deleted D. This tends to happen in front of a consonant and is often used in everyday expressions and common verbs. He subscribed to the channel. He subscribed to the channel. They managed their expectations. They managed their expectations. Last but not least, we have taps or flaps. This happens when you have a D sound between a vowel before it and a vowel after it. This can also happen just due to rapid speech, such as when an H is deleted at the beginning of the next word, and as a result, the D ends up being next to a vowel in the end. Let's go through some examples of when we use taps and flaps. Say these along with me so that you know how to do them. He freed up his schedule. He freed up his schedule, which, by the way, means that he made availability in his schedule. He freed up his schedule. She borrowed his phone. She borrowed his phone. You'll notice the H is deleted, so we treat it like a flap because now that the H is gone, it's between two vowels. She borrowed his phone. All right, everyone, I hope that you learned a lot of new, very valuable information for pronouncing these ed verb endings. All right, everyone, that is it for this video. I hope that you learned a lot from it and that it will help you continue to improve in your English fluency and confidence. This video just focused on ed after voiced consonants and vowels. And the next one will work on what happens to it when it's after voiceless consonants as well as T and D. So you don't want to miss it. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to sign up for our free Go Natural English tips, where we provide you lots of essential everyday English tips and strategies by email. It's easy and it's free. And then finally, don't forget, pre-registration is open for our complete Go Natural English Fluency course, so you do not want to miss it. Seriously, guys, it is a game changer. If you'd like to continue learning, I highly recommend you check out this video up here, and I will see you at our next video. Bye, guys.